Welcome to the Philip Levy Show, discussing health, wealth, and life. Here we go.
All right, let's jump right in. Kelly Ryerson, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Let's not beat around the bush. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you so passionate about it?
Oh, yes. So I am Kelly Ryerson. I am writing, you might see me on Instagram as something called Glyphosate Girl. And I do a lot of work around agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and hoping for a food system that decreases the level of toxicity in our food. So hopefully over time, decreasing the use of chemical inputs into our food system. And so I came across this because I really struggled with chronic illness for years. And about 10 years ago, probably it kicked off. And I had just a bunch. It's interesting because there's so many people now with vague chronic disease, and that was my case. So I was having really weird symptoms. So I was having like neurological issues where my hands were numb, and I was like, kind of my eyesight was coming and going. I had really strange rashes all over my body, and just weird things just kept on coming up, and my hair was kind of getting thin. And so I saw probably in the course of trying to figure out what was wrong, I saw probably like 20 doctors, and each doctor would give me a different medication to try. And then
fun.
More symptoms come from that. Yeah. So that would cause all kinds of side effects to things.
Right.
And at one point, I was on 2 antidepressants, a benzodiazepine for anxiety, a steroid, and gabapentin, which is another anti-inflammatory. But still like with no root cause at all. And it is just horrific. And so I constantly, as happens to many women, I constantly was hearing, well, maybe you're like a hypochondriac and imagining these symptoms. And I'm like, I'm not.
That's got to make you feel great when some medical professional's like, well, you're probably just a crazy lady.
I mean, basically, that's yeah.
The culmination of my medical expertise is you're just crazy.
Yeah.
That's got to be very frustrating.
As soon as like they didn't know what was wrong with me, it was like, I must be nuts. And so that's why I was taking all these meds. Like, well, maybe, and finally I'm like, maybe I am crazy, because at this point I couldn't walk anymore. And actually my husband had to carry me off of the bathroom floor. Like, it was really bad. And
oh, no.
I didn't have MS. I'd had like an MRI, a full body MRI, 2 hours. Like, they found nothing. I'm like, what on earth is it then that's causing this? And so I finally went to a psychiatrist. I'm like, well, maybe I am imagining the whole thing, right? And so went to a psychiatrist who happened to have intake blood work that was a vitamin panel. And oh my God, I was completely deficient across the board. Like, I had 0 vitamin D. I had scurvy from no vitamin C.
Yeah.
I had B12 levels that were abysmal, and just, I didn't have any nutrients in my body. I'm like, oh my God, this might be it. So I bring this to my primary care doctor. And the primary care doctor is like, oh, those vitamins, they don't actually mean that much.
Wow.
And this is, by the way, a Harvard, Stanford trained doctor who is telling me, those things are overstated. The importance of those like key biological building blocks, right?
How frustrated were you to hear something like that?
Oh my gosh. Absolutely out of my mind, frustrated. Out of my mind. And, at the time, like even in the last 3 to 5 years, probably helpful from COVID, there's a lot more information on supplements and how you go about like being well balanced. At the time, there was no place to go where you'd be like, okay, so let's see, you have no D, but you need to add these other vitamins and this and that. And so I ended up actually taking a physiology class through the extension course at Berkeley to try and learn, how do you rebuild yourself? Because each time I'm trying to take B1, like, I'm getting severe anxiety. Why is that? Like, I had to figure it out. And so I did. I started healing myself. And then I went to a doctor who said, I think you should try being gluten-free. Because we don't know why, but some people are having some success with that. And I'm like, well, I don't have celiac disease, which, is an autoimmune condition where you can't tolerate gluten. But okay, I'll go ahead and try it. And oh my gosh, within a few weeks, I started having a slow resolution of my symptoms. I'm like, could it really be gluten? I'm like, it can't be gluten. That's just like a diet trend. Like, that's not a thing. And so I tried it again and I was like, oh my gosh, all my symptoms came rushing back. I had a huge like lupus-like rash on my face. I'm like, oh my God, it's the gluten.
So it was a gluten sensitivity that you were having, and a vitamin deficiency, or
Both.
both? Okay.
Both. And so I went to, my sister actually was diagnosed with celiac disease around the same time. And so we went to Columbia University. They were having a celiac and gluten sensitivity like medical conference. And so there's a scientist who's standing at the front of the room, and he said, we don't know why there's this big epidemic of gluten sensitivity. We aren't sure, because when you give someone who's supposedly gluten sensitive a sterilized gluten product, so like nothing else but the gluten, they're not having the same inflammatory effects in their body as they do when they eat like a piece of bread. So what is it that's in the gluten? There must be something else. And so I went to the microphone and I said, hey, do they spray anything on this? Like, I feel like they might spray Roundup on the wheat, and no one there knew. And so they're like, they don't spray a weed killer on the wheat. That wouldn't make sense. And I'm like, okay. And I was like super embarrassed. And I sat down,
So this was kind of the turning point for you.
It's a huge turning point.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I went to, so the conference was over, or the session was over, and I'm in the back of the conference room, and scientist from General Mills, which is a huge cereal producer, found me, and he's like, hey, can I talk to you? I'm like, sure. And he said, so yes, Roundup is sprayed on most of our grains, and we know that there's a problem with it, but it's going to take 2 decades to change the farming practice of spraying the grains with this carcinogenic weed killer Roundup.
Okay, so you're at Columbia University with your sister at a gluten conference, and you happen to ask about so what made you come to the precise question about, was it just kind of a series of an elimination of possibilities?
Yeah.
And then the second part is, was the General Mills scientist, I imagine this kind of like Rocky and Bullwinkle, like Natasha and the evil guy, like in a trench coat, like in a dark hat, like, hey, come here.
It was kind of like that.
Was it kind of like we don't talk about this, but ... Was that kind of the scenario?
Oh my gosh, your presumption is exactly spot on. So strange, because I'm realizing there's this huge disconnect between academia and research and physicians and the food system. The fact that they haven't even thought that through. There's this medical problem that is infiltrating our entire like American population, and they're not thinking, okay, what is it that's sprayed on the food? Okay, so at this point I'm thinking, and the only reason why I asked is because the guy had said, oh, well, there must be something else on the grain. And I'm like, oh, I bet they spray pesticides. That's the only, it was a really random question, but I'm like,
yeah,
sure, they've looked at that.
I mean, everyone knows what a crop duster is. Like, I mean,
Totally.
what is that? What's
exactly? And it's not, I'm from the Bay Area, and so it's not like I've spent a lot of time around agriculture, but
well, I'm from Tennessee, and I know exactly what I mean. They're cool looking planes that stop at the highway, and then they start letting some magical chemical out as soon as they get back over the fields. So of course, naturally, that makes sense for you to ask something like that. The odd question is, and maybe it's, it probably comes down to dollars, and who's getting paid. But I don't want to take the thunder out of your story. So please continue.
Okay, so from that point, so then I was like, okay, so General Mills is onto this. It was definitely a hush hush, come over here. We know there's a problem. We know we have a responsibility to put pressure on the farmers to stop spraying so that we'll purchase cleaner grains. But it's not going to happen.
General Mills
said this,
that we should do this, but it's going to cost more money, so we're not going to do it, kind of thing.
That's right. And changing farmer behavior, as it turns out, is incredibly challenging.
Why is that?
Because it's usually costs a lot of money to do so, or like there's a lack of education. This age of pesticides started around World War II, where they had to repurpose a lot of chemicals, like, oh, these things also are great as weed killers, you know. So they took 2,4-D, another really common chemical. It's used on all of our food, and it's half of Agent Orange, and we're eating it. Like, you find it in your urine.
Say that again. Say that again, please. So we went from spraying the battlefields of France to Nebraska.
That's right. Because it's so great to have these like defoliants that they could spray in areas and just, you know, kill down, in particular, obviously in Vietnam, famously, like all those forests, being able to just dump Agent Orange and finding that, you know, incredibly successful with getting rid of. So they took the component out of Agent Orange that was so effective in doing that, and then just brought it over to our agriculture system. Like, great, this is repurposed. This is a fantastic tool for our food, our, you know, and there's another, atrazine is another terrible one. Roundup itself actually was first discovered as metal. So it was a pipe cleaner, like, or a metal boiler cleaner.
Roundup was it? I'm sorry. Can you say that again? Roundup.
Yeah. So glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. So it's a chemical that was discovered, like, I think in the 50s or the early 60s. And there were scientists and chemists that were looking for medical purposes for things. They couldn't find one for this. And so they ended up selling the patent to be able to use it as a metal pipe cleaner, or like a boiler cleaner, because it had an amazing ability to bind to minerals inside of these pipes and collect them and then just clean it out. So it started like that. And then Monsanto, which is it is no longer, but is a huge agricultural chemical company, bought up the patent to that. And when they realized, oh, you can use this as a fantastic weed killer. So they had glyphosate made into a formula that is now the Roundup that you see in Home Depot. And you can spray it, but actually the residential use is only like 15% of its use. The rest is used on our farms. And so this completely revolutionized American agriculture. And just to understand how huge agriculture is, like, if you go to Washington, D.C., you have to go and check out what the USDA looks like, the United States Department of Agriculture. So this is a massive, massive, massive building with just so many employees. I think it's second only to our military in terms of so agriculture is just an enormous, enormous thing for this country. And so they were doing great. Like, Monsanto was having fantastic sales of this Roundup product, but they were going to be running out of patent soon. And so they're like, we need to come up with something else to be able to continue selling this Roundup to farmers. So they developed what is now known as the genetically modified seed. So that's GMOs. And GMOs were brought into the lab. They brought seeds into the lab. They genetically modified them to be able to survive the effects of glyphosate. So farmers could go and plant these seeds and then spray tons and tons of glyphosate on top of their crops and kill all the weeds around the crops, and then they still would grow.
Okay, so the GMOs, which I'm sure everyone knows, they've seen, oh, GMO. I've seen that before, but they might not realize what that is. So Monsanto is they develop a seed that the plant can take this poison, but the plant doesn't die. And so people, whomever at Monsanto, is like, oh, well, the plant doesn't die, so it won't kill humans also. That's sell. Is that? That's right. Basically,
and actually, they were selling it like, you know, a lot of their salespeople still say this is as safe as water. You can drink it.
You can drink glyphosate.
It's not toxic. Yeah.
Okay. Has anyone actually on that, making those claims, actually drank and
Well, I met a farmer who actually did drink it, and he's like, I'm fine. I mean, I had cancer, but it's not because of that. And I'm like, well, you know.
Oh,
I guess
wow.
we don't ever know exactly why we
except for this whole cancer thing. Like, I'm fine. It's like, okay. It's a really nice tractor that someone bought for you also.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. I mean,
I know it's so, and you know, I never really thought this through. And you know, so in 1996, these seeds are introduced. The use of glyphosate and Roundup goes through the freaking ceiling, because now there's a system of planting corn and soy and they're GMO, they're genetically modified, you can spray them, they won't
They're in
die.
everything.
Every single thing. And all of the animal feed, unless it's like a grass-fed organic animal, will
Right,
have.
right. Unless you have to pay, you pay through the nose to not be poisoned,
Right.
which
Yeah,
is
exactly.
tough for a lot of people who aren't on the upper middle class spectrum. Like
It's
you
just
can't if you
terrible.
can't pay $25 per pound of meat, or 50, even take $10 off that, you're going to be okay. That's a lot. Wow. So
Yeah.
okay, so 1996, these seeds are introduced. I mean, that's not that long ago. Like I can remember what I was doing in 96. I
Yeah.
wasn't, as established as I am now, but I was, running around in the schoolyard like ho hum. So before that,
I
in
mean, I
95,
wasn't born yet, but
yeah, of course not. You've just developed very well and taken a strong stance and have a wonderful family, and a husband, who's much older than you, which is in
what
some
much
places.
older.
um, so in 96, I was still a little sprout, but I was, no pun intended there. But like that was Clinton. That was, yeah, Clinton era one, I guess.
Yep.
He was, yeah, or no, his second, whatever. It was during the Clinton administration. Like I remember what was going on there. So before 95, Kelly, I'm sorry, excuse me, before 96, what was different? Food was cleaner. Food
Yeah.
was
So food was
better.
cleaner. They were using there are a lot of insecticides and fungicides that were also used after World War II.
Uh-huh.
So it wasn't great at that time, but the sheer penetration, like just the massive quantity of chemical change that happened in that 96 definitely made this. So like when I was growing up, there wasn't as much toxic exposure at all in our food system. Like this has
Okay.
just changed. This has been a game changer. And then you add to that, so you have the GMO seeds that are tolerant to the Roundup, but then you add this practice, which gets back to the gluten, something called pre-harvest desiccation. So what that is farmers are like, oh, this is fantastic. If we kill the wheat or whatever the grain, oats, all at one time using this chemical, then the harvest is going to be really easy. We'll just go, everything will dry out exactly simultaneously. It doesn't matter what the weather is. And then we'll just go in with our combine and we'll get everything like all in one swoop.
You mean kill the wheat as in like harvest it? Or
Mhm.
do you mean kill the wheat like kill the field and let it set for a season until you plant again? Or
So
but
like,
what do you mean by that?
yeah, so you have a field of wheat that's been growing. It's
Sure.
nearly ready for harvest.
Mhm.
And typically in the past, one part of the field might be ready for harvest, but another part might not be. So you have the farmer making like multiple trips out for whenever like the harvest is ready.
Mhm.
But if you go and you spray Roundup on top of that whole crop of wheat, it's going to kill it right then. And then you can go in and easily just cut it all off at once.
So make one trip instead of
One
two,
trip.
which
Yeah,
saves gas, which saves time, which
totally.
is, yeah,
And you're
okay.
not going to lose, you're not going to suddenly have a rain and lose one part of your crop because it's just very controlled. Like you
Got
know
it.
you're going to get everything then.
Got
So
it.
you do that. And so the Roundup is sprayed on it, goes into the wheat, and then directly goes to the mill, and it's just fresh with all this Roundup on it and goes immediately into our food, and then we're all eating it.
Well, they don't wash it.
No,
I mean, they
it
don't put
can't
it
be
through
washed
a.
because it's systemic. It's a systemic herbicide, so you can't wash Roundup off. And
What do you
so
mean? What do you mean when you say it's a systemic? Like it's in the DNA of
in the
the
DNA,
wheat?
exactly.
Huh.
So when it
That's
sprays, it goes inside of the leaf and it really starts messing with its energy. It's like energy path basically,
yeah.
and it kills it.
That's
And the big argument for Monsanto was, that's fine because the only humans actually don't have that pathway. It's called the shikimate pathway that's
say that
used.
again, please.
So it's called the shikimate pathway. That's a metabolic pathway that plants have.
Okay.
And out of that pathway, this different things come out of it. So these different amino acids, and including actually tryptophan. There's a downstream effect of serotonin. These different aromatic amino acids that a plant is supposed to have, they don't get, and it kills the plant when you spray glyphosate on it.
So right at tryptophan and serotonin. I mean, now you're talking words that are abundantly present in the human pathways, metabolic
Well,
pathways.
exactly. So Monsanto says, don't worry, like humans don't have that. Well, where we have it is in our gut microbiome.
Well,
So that
that's
bacteria has that pathway.
okay. And as we're learning very quickly, the microbiome in the gut is actually incredibly important to overall health.
I mean, so vital. It's like every single day you find another thing between like your neurological function, certainly the mood. A big chunk of our serotonin comes from our microbiome. And so what's really, really creepy about glyphosate is that it selectively kills and impacts our good gut bacteria, but actually can be supportive of our bad gut bacteria. So the E. coli and the more pathogenic bacteria, it doesn't affect. So people get this major just by eating a regular diet. Because if you tested your urine right now, you would find tons of glyphosate. Like we can't avoid it. Even though I eat mostly organically, it'll be there.
Yeah.
I did a study. I actually sent 3 sperm samples from 3 different men into a lab to see if glyphosate's in there. It is. It crosses that blood-testis barrier. And then
Probably gonna.
wonder, okay, how come sperm counts are crashing? Well, actually, it kills sperm.
So now we're talking fertility and we're talking life cycle here. I'm not going to ask how you conducted that experiment. Maybe you want to provide backstory in the notes here, or we could speak privately about that. But so no, I'm in all seriousness, I'm sure it was scientific. That's not something to joke about. Is the proliferation of the human race and birth defects? I'm sure
Oh my gosh.
is coming up next.
Well, there's a really sad one, actually. So a study recently came out where some toxicologists studied a group of pregnant women. First of all, glyphosate's impact on fertility in both men and women is really significant. And there's tons of published research on it. And in terms, it can lead to preterm birth, miscarriages. And so a lot of functional doctors will say, just get glyphosate out of your diet immediately if you're trying to get pregnant or if you're pregnant, because that can have a huge impact for both the man and the woman.
And just so we're clear, getting glyphosate out of your diet would require you, one, to eat as organically as possible, as cleanly as possible, farm to table, as trace that lineage as much as possible, and like all the more reason to, like a steak is not a steak, a grain is not a grain, a vegetable is not a vegetable, and to really look at like don't buy your groceries at Walmart or Target or
Exactly.
like that's good. Would you say that's
Unless
a good
they're
start?
organic.
Organic is yes. Organic's also a term I feel is very loosely thrown around and put on many things that actually are not organic. But yeah, wow, that's
Well, it's so this, to add some more fire. I mean, there's so many things that are wrong with this, but so there's a study that came out and they tested a bunch of pregnant women and their glyphosate levels in their second trimester of pregnancy. And those with the highest levels of glyphosate in their urine who had baby girls found that the distance between the vagina and the anus in those baby girls was starting to get longer. And so that is androgenization. So now we have these babies that are being born, and you can see that this is definitely changing genes.
mm-hmm.
And a further study then went, but this one was in it was in a rat study. But so you see, okay, the child, so in this case, the same. So the mom has the baby. The mom is the only one that's been fed the Roundup in a normal kind of like appropriately similar doses to what a human might.
Like a Lucky Charms or something like that.
Yes, yeah. Like an average kind of thing. And so the pregnant mom is exposed and she has it, and then she has her baby. And the baby might have a few things going on, but it's not that apparent. By the time it reaches the grandchild and the great-grandchild, and none of the others are fed Roundup, the genetic changes have been so severe that they are no longer fertile.
So you're talking about like a sterilization of potentially, 90% of the human race.
Yes.
If these studies were transferred over into rats, I'm sorry, into humans. That's really scary shit, man.
I mean, I feel like I'm dealing with this every single day. I'm staring at this, knowing that it's no exaggeration to say this is end of species. Like,
Yeah.
we're staring at end of species because of this chemical that's sprayed all over our food.
And this only started 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. I apologize to keep interrupting you. This is
No, go
something that's
ahead.
very striking and frightening. And so, I suppose it's, the people who sit on these boards. I believe Justice Clarence Thomas was a board member of Monsanto.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of a insider interest right there. Excuse me, Chief Justice on the Supreme Court. So, they're all, this is 30 years ago that this started. So this type of farming and this type of just inundation with chemicals. They're all going to be dead by the time this takes hold. I will hopefully be a grandfather, but you also want to. I don't want to bug my kids. Be like, hey, where's my grandkids? And it's like, well, remember all those cereals you fed me?
Totally.
Turns out you're not going to be getting any offspring, and it's because you wanted to save $1 when you bought your meat back in your 20s and 30s. And you shopped on the inside of the grocery store, not the outside.
Totally.
That's really, really scary. So just playing devil's advocate here. Is there anything else that it could be? Like if there are studies that are just like, kind of a hammer see nails scenario, like if we're looking for specifically glyphosate, and I'm sure Monsanto's like, oh, well, there's cell phones and there's, the water you're drinking.
Oh, yeah.
And when I say Monsanto, I'm being inclusive of everyone in that big agro field. So what does that field look like?
Certainly plastics are also big endocrine disruptors, and like they're a toxin to be concerned about. The other agricultural chemicals are of big concern as well. There's one, atrazine, which is the second most used, and it's another end of species one.
And what is atrazine? Because you said that earlier, and I was wondering, like, why are you not atrazine girl? Why are you a glyphosate girl?
Well, the reason why I'm glyphosate girl is simply because it's by far and away the most used pesticide in the world. And
okay.
So you will see that everywhere. Now, atrazine is number 2, but it's nowhere near as much as glyphosate. And what's really concerning to me about that is, so there's a scientist that's over at Berkeley. His name is Dr. Tyrone Hayes. And he did a study on atrazine and did levels that we'd be exposed to in our water or food, and studied the effect on frogs. And what happened to the frogs is they switched sexes. So inside of the frog testes, you had ovaries forming. And you had, males mating with males. You had just a lot going on. And he had a horrible experience because Syngenta, which is another chemical agriculture company, had hired him to do the study. And when he got those results,
Bet they retracted that study real quick, didn't they?
Well, they followed him, death threats, the whole business, like terrifying, threatened his young daughter. Just.
So they hired Dr. Hayes to research the effects of atrazine.
Right.
And the effects on frogs were that the frogs switched genders.
Right.
And after he published, or he came to
he eventually
wrote the checks.
Yeah.
Okay.
He said, you're not going to, that's fine if you don't pay me, but I'm going to publish this. And that's when the death threats started happening, and people would just sneak up on him. And I mean, horrible things like, I know your daughter's at home alone right now, really creepy stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty terrible.
So
atrazine
that happens in glyphosate too. That happens in glyphosate. I've had my fair share of, and going back to this Columbia conference. So whether those scientists know or not about the glyphosate situation, I don't know. But I do know that I talked to a Harvard scientist, who's a gastroenterologist, and I said, these problems you're talking about with gluten sensitivity and, its connection actually with autoimmune conditions, say, like, how come you're not talking about Roundup? How come you're not talking about glyphosate? And he said, oh, that's a big problem. But if I were to mention that to Harvard, that I wanted to study that, then they wouldn't let me do it. Because Monsanto and agricultural chemical companies, which now, by the way, are owned by pharmaceutical companies because they decided to buy up our food system as well, they donate so much to universities that is not
Right.
allowed.
That's not a good thing at all. I want to say everyone has their lobbyists, but I mean, so Monsanto was, you mentioned that it was very large, and I have to ask about was it broken up and sold off to big pharma?
So Bayer came in, so Bayer Pharmaceuticals, so
Aspirin, right?
there was a lot of merger in the whole entire industry between different pharmaceutical companies and agricultural chemical
Okay.
companies. So that was
Okay.
happening, but no one wanted to touch Monsanto. So Monsanto is the last one waiting because it is just like synonymous with the devil in terms of PR, this Monsanto company, because it literally is poisoning everyone.
Hmm.
So finally, Bayer's like, okay, we don't have any great pharmaceuticals in the pipeline anymore. So we need to also get into this game if we're going to survive. And they already had some pesticides and they had some GMOs, but it was nothing near as big as what Monsanto was. So they, in 2018, bought Monsanto. And so now you don't see the Monsanto name anywhere. It's just Bayer.
Right.
It's Bayer Agricultural Sciences. And so, it's really disturbing. We very firmly know from Roundup lawsuits that have been happening that Roundup exposure, just from like your Home Depot purchasing and using in your home, causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Well, Bayer creates a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma drug to treat it. It's a great, really
That's a great
profitable
business
drug.
model right there. Yeah. And I would bet also that as their what was the word that you used? The systemic harvesting, desiccation.
Desiccation.
That as the nutrients from the soil are being stripped away, now this same company that's stripping those nutrients from the soil and taking them from our food also has a multivitamin that we can buy. Would that
Exactly.
be accurate? Kind of
Yes,
a
because what's
whole
happening,
vertically integrated cycle of buy our stuff.
it's so enraging. So they, just going back, they used to use it as a metal, it bound metals in metal pipes.
Right.
Now that's happening in our soil. So
Yeah, now it's cleaning our pipes out, literally.
yeah, yeah. And so we are missing those minerals. And so then that goes back to, why was I so extremely deficient in so many things? And, most people, you see how many people are clearly magnesium deficient, and like this anxiety level and the just depression in this country. And it's looking around like it could be
Through the roof. Through the absolute roof.
We don't have
Yeah.
serotonin and we don't have magnesium to chill.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I can't chill out unless I have pot. Well, probably because you're severely magnesium deficient and zinc deficient because you don't have it in your body.
Wow. Okay, so that's really depressing, but it's also it's information that needs to be shared. And I mean, I know that you are one who has done your research on this. So so what do we do about this? I mean, other than, buy local and, buy green,
Yeah.
what's
Well,
step one?
Hopefully, so there are a few things coming down the pipeline. So things to keep your eye on. Certainly, first and foremost, support, go to your farmer's market, find out and talk to the farmers and ask them what they use on their food. Sometimes farmers can't afford the organic certification, but they actually are really low pesticide use. So
now, when you say they can't afford organic certification, is that like a permit that says you are certified organic? So why wouldn't you have to earn it? Why do you have to pay
it's
for it?
frustrating. Everything's a
Yeah.
business, right? It's paying for those people from the USDA to come out and check your farm and be sure that you're not using these.
I mean, well, I understand. Okay, I understand that. You have to pay for the people to come and do their jobs, but it's also your job, USDA.
And also, our tax is enough that you would think they can send a few people out to these farms, right? It's not that bad.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. It's not. Okay. All right. So I apologize again to interrupt there, but continue, please.
Okay. So go to your farmer's market if you have one. I mean, we're lucky here in our area. Northern California, we have them. A lot of places they don't, and they'll have a food desert, and then that's hard. So look online. You can order things online now. There's good mail order organic stuff. Outside of that, in terms of being active, and thinking about, okay, what can we do on a policy level? Now, I have gone 2 times to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and talked to the board, the Office of Pesticides, with a group of scientists and activists, and we presented to them all this published research that shows all the problems with this chemical, and they've said it's straight up anecdotal. Like, this doesn't mean anything. We say it's perfectly fine for health. So the regulators are so bought off by Bayer that nothing is going to change there. So now I'm turning my attention over to trying to get some acts and bills put together over in Congress, because there is a component of the ag committee that is interested in halting the use, at least on grains. So and
where else, and is it used on all plants, on all large crops?
A lot of the large, so this, unless it's organic. So it's used it's used sometimes on potatoes, it's used on sugarcane, it's used on beets. It's like the list is very, very long.
Is there no alternative?
So interesting.
I mean, from a farm, if I'm a farmer and I'm like, okay, glyphosate kills a bunch of stuff, glyphosate grow, like, great, that's how I feed my family. You know, I'm creating jobs. That's the usual
and they've said that
argument is I mean, that's, you know, that's the usual politician's argument, is like, it creates jobs. But if, I mean, if we're really going to be I don't know, I guess it's easy to point out a problem. What is the alternative? What's the solution, you know?
I'm definitely really empathetic to the farmer, because I see you know, it's easy for me to complain about it, but you know, if they don't sell a crop, then they go bankrupt. So that's not really fair. But the regenerative practices, so this is where the agriculture comes in. So regenerative practices are soil healing farming practices, which obviously doesn't include a lot of the chemicals. There's a big, big push for this movement of regenerating agriculture and giving farmers some sort of safety net to make the transition over a 3 to 7 year period of not using chemicals and using other things like cover crops and other techniques.
What is that? Is that a cover crop like squash after?
Or like alfalfa or what have you. So you have your main crop, and then on the off season, you'll grow what's called a cover crop. And the cover crop will put nutrients back into the soil that have been stripped during the other time. And that turns out to be extremely healing to the soil, and like puts the soil biome, because they have a biome too.
No, of course, absolutely.
You know, back in place. And so that is something that is definite. So there's something called the Farm Bill, and every 7 years, the government decides, okay, where are we going to dedicate money in our farm and agriculture system? Like, what are our priorities? So that's a huge thing that's coming up in 2023. And a lot of regenerative farmers are in there pushing for government support for this transition. And the head of the USDA, his name's Tom Vilsack, and he used to be called Mr. Monsanto under, I think it was under Obama. None of the presidents, by the way, have been supportive of this at all. They've all been pro-chemical agriculture, Democrat, Republican, everyone has been. But anyway, his grandson, he was saying in a talk about starting to dedicate more money to regenerative farming, he said, my grandson can't have 2 doses of dairy or else it makes him feel sick. So he just has to pick one. And that's just not right, that, you know, he's getting dairy intolerant. And so there's so many food intolerances that if you can get those leaders to see, oh my gosh, it's connected to food.
So, okay. So, all right. So there is a silver lining to this, is like, it's like, guess what, guys? It's affecting everybody. You're not immune from it. I hope you like all those extra commas in your bank accounts. It's not going to save you.
Totally. It's not. And it's not, if you have a family member that's sick enough or struggle with infertility, and you realize, this is the resolution. Then you're going to be like, oh, tell me more, you know?
Because sorry, go ahead.
So I'm working with a crew to really push that through. Senator Cory Booker is really on the front lines of this work, and hopefully we're going to get. I'm going to work on a bill with him and with this other team to lower the pesticide levels to European levels, which happen to be lower, because the regulators aren't going to do anything, because they're just totally
out. So it sounds like, not that we should rest on our laurels or anything, but it sounds like that as more people are affected or have, you know, I mean, how many people do you know? I remember growing up, like, when I was a child in the 90s, like I didn't really, granted I was young, but like you didn't hear people say like, oh, I have a friend who has cancer, or, so and so died of cancer. Like maybe like someone who is really old and it was just their cells stopped multiplying correctly. And that's pretty much what happens with, anyway, but people are just like, oh, I'm 30 and I've got cancer now. Oh, I've
Yeah.
got, it's like, what? Like everyone knows
Right.
several people who have some chronic condition that just didn't seem to exist. And it's easy to just point the fingers at cell phones or radio waves or what else. But the things that we put into our body, I don't believe are looked at with the scrutiny that they should be.
I mean, I just don't think so. And it's so sad because I feel privileged, So, for example, my son had horribly debilitating ocular migraines, like really bad, had to take medicine for them.
Mm-hmm.
And when he went gluten-free and we started eating mostly, like I would say we're probably a 70% organic family because when you eat out, it's just hard.
Yeah.
Anyway, ocular migraines went away, hasn't had one since. And so
do you think it was the back to the beginning of the conversation? Do you think it was the gluten, or do you think it was the grain and the stuff on it?
So research is starting to finally show what I kind of suspected back then, but couldn't point to the evidence. Combination of glyphosate and gluten is especially damaging on our gut lining. And so it causes just this level of inflammation throughout the body and like a toxic kind of overload, because it literally causes this permeability in the intestine to let bad things into your bloodstream. And so that's why you see the epidemic of autoimmunity, because your body starts turning on itself. And you see that little kids. I have a friend who had a 2-year-old son. Has still, but he had Crohn's disease, 2 years old, which is a very severe autoimmune condition in the intestine. And I said, you need to think about going organic and gluten-free. And she said, oh, I could never do that. It's so sad. Like I couldn't restrict his diet like that. And I'm like, well, you really
you want to restrict his lifespan instead?
I just didn't get it. She's like, well, the drug really treats it just fine. I'm like, well, that's not a great long-term solution. I'm thinking to myself, you have to be careful to give too much of your opinion. But I'm like, wow, I hope
yeah. So, I mean, it's better mom to mom, but I mean, if I were, it's better mom to mom than dad or random guy on the street to, hey, here's how to raise your kid. That's a touchy subject. It is, but I mean, that's how you defeat. Not to say that your friend is stupid, but you defeat dumb people with science.
Yeah, you do. Exactly.
And that's actually what I have right here. Just like to show that science helps you prove others are dumb. I live it. So
it's true.
As long as there's empirical data and there's evidence, like the experiments that produce the same results, that point in the direction of X as the cause of a problem, it's probably going to be X, unless there's some other science offers like, please, if you feel it's otherwise, let's prove that.
Totally. And there are some scientists. One of my friends, she's a scientist at MIT, and she's been just berated and publicly like brought down because her voice is strong and she's from MIT. And she said, if it's not, people say, oh, well, how could you say that that's what it is? You could be this. And she's like, I would argue that none of those things people aren't as exposed to those things, and their digestion and their microbiome is not exposed to those things to the same extent as this massive pesticide that, I think a CDC study just recently came out that was 80% of people have like a significant amount of it in your urine. So
yeah, it's like everybody has microplastics in their system because we all have plastic in our lives.
Exactly.
Just cool. If you measure it, then you will see. And then that may shut up the naysayers.
Yeah. In terms of what people can do, I'm hopeful hopefully your listeners can keep their eyes open. In 2023, we're really hoping to push through, as I was mentioning, a bill, hopefully, that we get drafted, but there's going to be a time that we need people to reach out to their senators and their congresspeople and just let them know that this is on their mind, and even like be willing to potentially send a letter. This is what glyphosate is, because you'd be surprised how many have no idea what's really going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't know. That's one of the reasons that, through the grapevine and our mutual connections, I was like, son of a bitch, really? I'd love to have that conversation. And that's, the whole reason that I have this platform, is to bring interesting people on and tell your story. So I wanted to ask about, there was a post that you put up last August, and was it a push to get Roundup off the shelves by 2023? Or is that coming? Has there been big moves towards that?
So there were these enormous Roundup trials. So a bunch of people that have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma are claiming that it's because they sprayed Roundup and that exposure caused their cancer. And it does. The research shows that it does. The court cases shows that it does. And so as part of the settlement, finally, Bayer said, okay, we're willing to take it off of the residential use. So we won't sell it anymore. We won't sell glyphosate-based herbicides. And so that was so exciting. And I wrote that and everything, like, yay, it's off the shelves. Well,
yeah, I've seen it. I don't know. Okay. What happened?
Well, they're saying, so 2023, we're almost there. Well, so they're saying that it won't have glyphosate. However, they have some chemicals that actually might be more toxic going into its place in the Roundup product. So you can still go and buy Roundup, but
so it's even deadly. It's Roundup.
Yeah.
It's deadlier Roundup.
Yeah.
It's okay. So how is that legal?
Because the EPA will say till the day they die that it is perfectly safe to be exposed to all of these things.
And the EPA's board members are also part of, they're all hanging out.
There's something called like a revolving door. So for each of these EPA people, there's a job waiting for them that's really lucrative as soon as they're done with their term at the EPA. And sometimes they even go out and then back. Hillary Clinton herself was a lawyer for Monsanto early in her career. So she was really, really psyched to expedite this GMO and like chemical ag into government. It was under the Clinton administration that it was really shepherded. And it's just interesting because it doesn't seem pro-health. A lot of lifelong Democrats are really shocked to hear that a Democrat would possibly be doing something that is very environmentally destructive, because of course it's not the soil either.
Right. I mean, Democrats are so, they're angels. They're totally, blameless for anything. So, all right. So now there's a newer, deadlier Roundup coming out. Is that what? Great. Awesome.
So don't buy it. But there is another product that hopefully it has its preliminary EPA approval. It's coming. Hopefully by the end of 2023, there will be use in market. So like at Home Depot, of a non-toxic alternative that is just as effective.
Oh, great. So what is that called?
Exciting.
Is it?
Well, it's being rebranded. Actually, I'm working as a consultant to rebrand it.
Fantastic.
Right now they're calling it Contact, but it'll probably be something different. And it's out of Australia, and I think will be a whole game changer. It's so exciting.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, so it's out of Australia. So meaning that Bayer's not developing it.
They're not, and there's an agreement. It will never be sold to Bayer.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so there's hope on the horizon.
There is, and that can actually be used on farms too. It will really have a big role in that desiccation stuff I was talking about.
Okay, so all right, so that's
some good news.
Yeah, that is good news. All right, fantastic. I feel a little less depressed about the current state of things, as if you didn't have enough problems. That's going to be the soundbite to the show.
That's really the truth.
Is are you ready to be depressed about what you're eating?
it's so awful living in it. Oh my God, yeah.
Okay, so we can. Before I ask that question, there was another post about, I love my science. I also love my Neil deGrasse Tyson. Tell me how he's connected with this. Why? Because I read a post that you put up, and I was like, I need to ask about this. Why is Neil deGrasse Tyson not in our good graces regarding this topic?
Yeah, so my son lost his mind when he learned this. So Neil deGrasse Tyson has been paid off by Monsanto through the years to be a huge supporter of this miraculous biotechnology called GMOs and the GMO system. And so it's not only him. It's, I mean, how brilliant of PR is that? They went out and they found
that's like getting Mr.
America's
Rogers
scientists.
to
Totally.
peddle your, like, hey kids, this, methamphetamine's delightful for you.
And then Bill Nye is the same way, and he actually came out against GMOs, suddenly went to Monsanto because they wanted to give him a tour of the lab, came out of Monsanto and said, I love GMOs. So we all wondered, what was that price tag? How much was he offered there to suddenly come out and be a huge proponent? I mean,
what?
Yeah.
So all of my science heroes are now, they're just in the bag of GMOs. Now, why would they? Oh, I guess everybody has their price.
I think everyone has their price, and they have deep pockets, those guys.
So they do have big, deep pockets. So, I mean, what is the case for convincing someone who's so respected and intelligent that a genetically modified organism is okay for you? Like, what is their evidence to, other than just like this research is false?
So there are several front groups that push this narrative that GMOs are what is going to be the answer to saving us all from hunger. And so it's a lie. They say in order to feed the world, you'll hear all the time. And now it's holiday time, so I hear that song "Feed the World," and I'm like, oh my gosh, is that part of it?
Yeah.
And so a large part of that came out of Cornell, something called the Cornell Alliance for Science, which is a Bill Gates backed front group for the agricultural chemical industry. And so they put together, working alongside a PR group called Ketchum, which is an FDI consulting, to really try and push this narrative that without chemical fertilizers and herbicides and GMOs, we will all starve to death. And they were successful extreme, because the government came in behind it too. And now taxpayers pay for this education system that you can look up online to learn about why we're all going to starve if we don't have this chemical agriculture system. So people get really scared.
And, fear is a powerful motivator.
Yeah. And if you don't believe in it, that means you're anti-science. They started saying you're a conspiracy theorist to say that. Similar terms that we've heard in the last few years, and just shutting down any researchers that would do the opposite. Meanwhile, if you actually look at the data, and there is a lot of data coming out of a place called the Rodale Institute, which I was so excited I got to go and spend a week there last month. It's in Pennsylvania. It's a research institution that for, I think, 50 to 75 years, they've been studying organic agriculture versus conventional, which is GMO agriculture. And so they'll set up a plot with organic, then far away, they'll do like a GMO one, and they'll compare what the yields are. And it's amazing because the first year, sometimes the GMO seed, like the GMO corn or whatever, will produce more yield, but over time, it does not.
And what happens over time? Just the soil depletion?
It's the same yield or less because of soil depletion. Yeah.
Well, that's okay. So now we're talking dollars. Like now you're losing, and that's what people, no matter how big you are, that's what people listen to. So if you're losing money,
you're stuck because you've already done this. You've damaged and killed off your soil. You're in this system where you're being paid not because you can sell things, but because the government is making sure you're paid because
you're being subsidized to
these things. And now they're really making this push in Africa as well, because Africa has so many starving people. Well, Africa has rejected repeatedly chemical agriculture, and they're like, just stop. We don't want it. Like, we want to keep our local varieties that have been around forever. And pressure on them has been insane. They're like, no, but drought. Well, so they supposedly have these drought tolerant GMOs. Well, they are no different than the regular. So that's a lie too. So it's just so much PR surrounding it.
Yeah. So it sounds like, sorry, go ahead.
Imagine it if actually you don't need technology because nature allows us to grow our food naturally.
Yeah. I mean, nature kind of has a tendency to work things out.
Totally.
That is insanely thought-provoking. Okay, so back to what can we do as our listeners? I mean, you mentioned writing a letter. 2023 is coming up, but I want this conversation to be timeless. Yes. What else other than spending a little bit more, eat real food, what are the strategies that you can share with us that you would suggest?
So what I've found is that with some momentum of more people knowing this, more people talking about it,
Hmm.
it is absolute, like, I don't want to just downplay. I mean, we shouldn't downplay, rather, like, the impact of the consumer, because simply because enough people are talking about glyphosate, some of the wheat mills are telling the farmers they are no longer willing to take any wheat that has glyphosate sprayed on it.
No shit. That's great.
Yeah. So that's starting to happen.
Okay.
So just talking about it, I mean, like, literally at your book club, at the bar, like wherever it is, just getting it out there, the information into the mentality of people, so that when you have that decision to make at a
Yeah.
split second, it can be there. It's making the change, which is so good because it makes you feel somewhat like in control of the situation.
Yeah.
Um, so
So we
that's
all
sort of like,
we all sweep our own doorstep kind of thing.
that's a thing.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just know, like, with increasing awareness, that it's going to push and one thing that I'm really hopeful for, and particularly of people that aren't necessarily in the health and fitness industry, but people that never think about the food, it's a long way to go from where I am to, like, where someone who has no time to even think about cooking,
Hmm.
or no money to buy things that would be healthy. And what does that path look like? But helping people to understand that connection between food and health, it actually is a real problem. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
a lot of
prioritizing that
people don't
knowledge.
connect it. Yeah, they don't connect it. And they're like, oh, I don't eat my fruits and veggies. Well, it's so much more than that. And using my own experience and so many experiences of others who have had these chronic diseases, being able to take that and be like, okay, this is what you need to try. It's probably your food. Maybe you don't need all those drugs.
Hmm.
Maybe you
Hmm.
do in some cases, but often you don't.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Like, do you really need, antidepressants, for example? 2 times in my life have been, one time in particular was life-saving. Like, I was really depressed. There's a place
Hmm.
in my mind for pharmaceuticals in times, but for long-term use, it
Yeah.
doesn't seem
Agreed.
right.
Right.
So, what can you do to not have to be a lifetime on Zoloft, right? And well, that's heal your gut, like, make these right decisions. And the more that,
Move
you know,
around,
like, you
exercise.
too, and you feel like seeing all these people who look to you as a health guy, and take your advice very seriously, the extent to which you can start making that connection even
Hmm.
more, like, real, the better.
Hmm.
Just
Excellent.
thinking about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I I tend to, my nutritional advice is very limited when my clients ask me. And it's limited for a reason, because people just stop listening. Basically,
Oh,
they, if your grandmother didn't cook with it
yeah,
and you can't pronounce it, don't put it into your body. If it stays,
totally.
if it stays fresh for more than a month, you probably shouldn't eat it. And those are just three things that you can remember easily. And it turns out it may also save your gut and save your gender and save your biological sex, whatever, not to offend anyone.
Yeah.
But it also may save the human race through
I mean, I
fertility.
actually think it will save the human race. I
Yeah.
know in my son's case, like, he right now is all about his testosterone, 'cause
Hmm.
he's
Hmm.
he's 17. So he's like, oh yeah.
Well, guess what?
Anyway,
A lot
he's
of a
really
lot of
worried
men, a
about
lot
that.
of middle-aged men that I work with are also worried about their testosterone. I can tell you that
Oh
with
yeah.
absolute confidence. I'm not going to name any names, but it's something that, like, we're domesticated. Like, I mean, everyone is, but we're meant to go out and hunt and compete and move things and provide. And if we only do that by click 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 on a keyboard, we're being deprived of our natural instincts to, hunt and move and run and kill a boar or whatever. And when that doesn't happen, then yes, your brain chemistry changes, and there tends to be something missing, and a lot of time the testosterone levels lower because of the environment. And
Mm,
add into that the stripping of minerals from your piping, and a lot of bad shit really starts to happen.
completely. I know,
So,
and it's sad. It's not
so
it's not natural.
it's definitely not natural. It's definitely not natural. The world that we live in is not a natural one. I mean, it's comfortable,
No.
but too much comfort is
It's
part
very
of the problem. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so let's. let's kind of recap here. And I would like you, please, because you're the expert here. Can you take us through, you know, what we just spoke about and why it's so important?
Yeah. So I just want to highlight the connection between chronic disease and what you're eating. And specifically, this alarming chemical called glyphosate. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in the weed killer Roundup, and it is sprayed all over our agriculture, all over our environment, even our backyards. And that chemical, the less exposure you have to it, the healthier you're going to be. And if anyone wants more specific health information on glyphosate, you can go to a place called PubMed. And so that is all the published medical research that's out there. And you can put in glyphosate and you can see all the impacts of published research, like you can see all the impact it's had. So in order to avoid it, try and eat as cleanly as possible, avoid GMO foods, and it's better to have organic grains because they won't have been sprayed with Roundup before harvest. And outside of that, then talk about it, spread the word, because the industry is making sure that people don't know about it because no one wants a weed killer on their food.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that's enough for me to just like, gross. No, I don't want that in my anything. I mean, even
carcinogenic, endocrine disrupting, infertility inducing weed killer.
If I'm going to kill myself slowly, I will be selective of the chemicals I put in my body. Thank you very much.
That's right. It might as well be fun.
Damn right. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. I will I'll talk with you after the show. I'll put in some in the show notes where to find you, your glyphosate girl, obviously, but also some of the articles that we were talking about. I'd love to include those in the notes as well. So I want to thank you so much for your time. This has been very informative, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was very fun.
You are very welcome, and I will see you later.
Great.
Thanks so much for tuning into the show. Please share and subscribe.